Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And we're going to be very culture heavy tonight, starting out with two great British actors, beginning with Alan Rickman, who died recently at the age of 69. Alan Rickman was a classically trained British actor, but he became a movie star of sorts in the United States. He actually came to the United States late as a movie star. It wasn't until 1988 in Die Hard that he made his first major screen appearance here. And from then on, he specialized in depressive intellectuals and, most importantly, in unctuous British villains. If you needed a British bad guy, Alan Rickman was your man. So besides Hans Gruber in Die Hard, he was also the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And most importantly, he was Professor Severus Snape in the Harry Potter series. Here's a brief clip of some of his most famous lines in the movies, ending with Professor Snape.
That's all the kitchen scraps for lepers and orphans. No more merciful beheadings. And call off Christmas.
Truly, madly,
I really, truly, madly love you.
really, truly, madly, deeply love you.
I really, truly, madly, deeply, passionately love you.
Die hard.
And walk out of here or be carried out. But have no illusions. We are in charge.
I'm just playing somebody who wants certain things in life, has made certain choices, and goes after them.
I wanted this to be professional, efficient, adult, cooperative, not a lot to ask. Alas, your Mr. Takagi did not see it that way, so he won't be joining us for the rest of his life.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. You to tell the hangman I don't want to see any broken necks in the morning. See some dancing.
From Jane Austen's timeless classic.
There's some blue sky. Let us chase it.
Academy Award winner Emma Thompson. Alan Rickman.
How is your sister?
I must get her home as quickly as possible.
Should anyone, student or staff, attempt to aid Mr. Potter, they will be punished in a manner consistent with the severity of their transgression.
Well, obviously the thing that Alan Rickman was known for was his voice. Here's the British writer and critic Paul Allen talking about Alan Rickman's legendary voice.
It was a great voice, wasn't it? Yes. I mean, a caressing voice that could seduce lots of women, I'm sure, at a long distance, which he could use as an instrument. I don't think he ever used it as voice beautiful, purely, in the way that, say, a Gielgud would have done. He used it, and I think you heard in those clips, actually, in ways to characterize the parts. He was a very concentrated actor. Everything he did want to be right, and that would include the way he used his voice and his body.
Well, that's the way they look at his voice in Britain. See the difference between Britain and the United States, because we take his voice a little less seriously. So he was once featured on Family Guy, leaving a message on his own answering machine.
Hello, you've reached Alan Rickman at 555-0122. Please leave a message at the beep. Hello, Alan Rickman. It's Alan Rickman, reminding you to move the pork chops from the freezer to the refrigerator so they defrost properly. Do not disappoint me. Alan, it's me again. Remember that turtle joke for the party?
And then you have the indefatigable frat boy Jimmy Fallon. He's such a card, inhaling helium with Alan Rickman.
What was the name of that character again, but based on the books? Professor Snape. No, the young boy with the scar on his... This is very difficult, but it's Harry Potter.
I'll tell you, we've come a long way from Jack Parr. We're going to move on now to another great British actor, Brian Bedford, who died recently at the age of 80. He's less well known to American movie audiences because he was primarily a stage actor. However, he was also in Robin Hood, not Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, but the animated version of Robin Hood from Disney, where he was the voice of Robin Hood. He occasionally did American television, Ben Casey, Frasier, but he was primarily a stage actor, Shakespearean. In the early 80s, I saw him in Stratford on Avon. A little later on, he moved to Canada and worked at Stratford, Ontario, where he did Shakespeare and then did a tour de force performance in Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. He became one of Canada's leading actors. Here's CBC television on the death of Brian Bedford.
In dramatic roles, he was formidable, but it was his comedic genius that brought Brian Bedford widespread acclaim.
Ignorance is like a delicate, exotic fruit. Touch it and the bloom is gone.
Effervescence on stage concealed a bleak early life. Bedford was born in a poor and unhappy family in England. At a young age, he lost both his brothers to tuberculosis.
I think I had to check out of that and go into a world of my own imagination. In other words, go into acting.
Rob? That's a naughty word. We never rob.
One of his early commercial successes, the voice of Disney's Robin Hood. But by 1974, Bedford discovered Stratford, Ontario, where his thirst for great classical plays could be quenched. It was the beginning of a love affair that stretched over 3 decades.
He represented, to me, the best of the Stratford Festival in that it brought people from around the world who then came here and adopted it as their own.
It was also at Stratford that Bedford first played the role that would make him famous to a whole new generation, and on Broadway too, Lady Bracknell in Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest.
He played her right down the middle as a kind of majestic gargoyle, and he was therefore extremely funny. He was just a hoot in that part and in every comic part he took on.
Bedford once said Stratford made his life. Tonight, theatre lovers in Canada are mourning the man who made theirs so much more entertaining, so much richer.
And Phoebus' car shall shine from far, and make and mar the foolish fates.
That was lofty.
Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
I got to mention one other thing about Brian Bedford. I said he wasn't on American television much, but he was a semi-regular on a real cool show that only lasted 1 season in 1967 starring Frank Converse. It was called Coronet Blue. It was sort of a takeoff on The Fugitive. The reason I mention it is because it gives me an excuse to play the theme song from Coronet Blue, which was one of the coolest theme songs ever on television, sung by Lenny Welch, the guy who sang Since I Fell for You.
Coronet blue, coronet blue. Deep down inside my brain, I keep hearing that wild refrain. Coronet blue, no other blue. I know that this must be the thing that can set me free.
I wonder what would have happened to Brian Bedford's career if the show had taken off. Well, we're going to move back to an American now and a little more lowbrow culture with Gene Jajonski, a.k.a. Dan Haggerty, who died recently at the age of 74. He's known for one role, but it was an iconic one. He was Grizzly Adams in the movie and the TV show The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams. Long before The Revenant, there was The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams, which is sort of The Fugitive meets Gentle Ben. And Dan Haggerty was the rugged-looking Grizzly Adams. It wasn't my cup of tea. I thought it was sort of 70s schlock, but it was family fare that people loved.
I am James Adams. The year was 1853, and I was leaving my home and my daughter. Everything I knew, forever. I'd been accused of a crime, a murder. It happened near my house. I had nothing to do with it. I was innocent. But how could I prove it? And how could Peg understand? She was 8 years old. Well, maybe someday her Aunt Cora'd explain. I wouldn't be coming back. Ever.
Daddy?
Like I say, a lot of people like that. Here's the theme song.
You have no room for the life you're leading anymore. Get away, the path is open. Leave the burdens of the world you never knew behind. Wear the sun in your heart. Hey, stormy weather, which way you try.
Like I say, a lot of people like that. Here's Dan Haggerty talking about how he got the role.
They'd made Grizzly Adams once before with another actor. They spent like $500,000 on the TV show. And it was actually a feature film. It wasn't a TV show at the time. But Mr. Fowler was a very bright guy. And when he saw the footage, he didn't like it. And so he was watching some new dailies of a new film they were doing called The Snow Tigers, which I was working on. And he said, now that guy should be Grizzly Adams, not that other guy we had. And he says to my wife, she was a secretary at the time, he said, do you know that guy? And she goes, yeah, his name is Dan Haggerty. And he goes, well, isn't your name Haggerty? She goes, yes. And he goes, well, are you related to him? Oh, yeah, he's my husband. Well, call him up and tell him to come down here. I want to talk to him about a show called Grizzly Adams. So I came down from Canada, met this guy, and he said, look, I made a movie called Grizzly Adams, but I'm not crazy about it. How would you like to be Grizzly Adams? Is a young man, in the footage we have already, we'll fade into the old character. And I said, no, I'd rather just do the whole thing myself. That's okay. Well, it says we only have $185,000 left in the budget. I said, well, let's see what we can do. So 7 of us went to Park City, Utah, and we filmed Grizzly Adams for $185,000.
All right, enough Grizzly Adams. We're going to move on now to our feature, Lois Weisberg, who died recently at the age of 90. Nice Jewish girl from Chicago. She was the city's first Commissioner of Cultural Affairs. Here's a 5th-star tribute to Lois Weisberg, featuring, among others, my man Rick Cogan, Yo-Yo Ma, and Tony Bennett.
It is so hard to define what Lois is. She is, to me, among the most creative people in the history of this city. She is, to me, also one of the most sort of intellectual, she's like an intellectual sponge.
She actually works well at all the intersections, so that it's not just culture and arts that she knows deeply, but she actually knows the people of Chicago deeply.
Malcolm Gladwell's article, 6 Degrees of Lois Weisberg, is really for all of us in Chicago probably more like 1 degree. I don't know of any of us in the cultural community that has not touched or been touched by both her wisdom and her passion and her influence.
I think it's a natural thing to her. I don't think it's a conscious thing. I think she says, I know this other person, you ought to get together, and maybe something will happen.
She had the jazz festivals, Gallery 37, music all over, dancing in the streets, Block 37, the Great Chicago Fire Sale, Cows on Parade. You could go on and on.
We approached her about the cows in the fall of '98. And we made a presentation to her. Basically, at the end of our presentation, she said, okay, well, let's do it. Within a week, she had come up with grant money from the Illinois Arts Council, and she had come up with the name Cows on Parade. She was able to persuade lots and lots of people to participate in what was sort of a crazy idea.
I was a fan of hers long before I met her. And so finally, when the moment came to meet her, she was, it was like love at first sight. We talked about the idea of Silk Road Chicago. And she said, oh, no problem. We can devote the whole summer to a Silk Road theme, kite festivals, outdoor foods, and whatever. And suddenly, hundreds of events took place. So she was able to take one idea and then have it flower and blossom.
That's probably the most magical part of Lois. If she believed in it, she found the ways to make it happen. Gallery 37, an incredible program for many, many years. Lois was very much a part of that, and what extraordinary foresight that Gallery 37 was able to not only bring professional artists in, but foster this whole generation of artists that right now are really shaping our visual landscape.
Someone indeed may have a show at the Art Institute, and during the interview process 30 years from now will say, well, yes, I am a most acclaimed artist on the planet these days, and I got my start with this thing called Gallery 37.
She's just so much fun to be with. And in a way, she's also been one of the great role models in my life.
I always say that I want to be Lois Weisberg when I grow up.
Congratulations, Lois, for all you've done to promote culture and the arts right through the years. You're wonderful. Thank you.
She was, is, and forever will be a force for good and the arts and really what civic responsibility means.
And I think the total effect of Lois Weisberg, what I will now call the Weisberg effect, is going to be felt for generations in this town.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. We're going to close with a brief mention of Giorgio Gomelsky, who died recently at the age of 81. He was the owner of the Crawdaddy Club in the 60s, the club that was to the Rolling Stones what the Cavern Club was to the Beatles. He also gave Eric Clapton the nickname Slow Hand. To pay tribute to Giorgio Gomelsky, we're going to close with the song that the Stones used to close the Crawdaddy Club with every night in the summer of 1963, written by Bo Diddley. This is Hey Crawdaddy.
Yeah. I got a line and you got a hole. Let's go fishing in the crawdad hole. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 9. I'm bigger than crawdad, make it on time. She said, hey.